thank you so much for joining today's event. Super stoked to be hosting this one to begin with. It's been a while since we've hosted a teaching event in Designly. My buddy Frostify is here to also help me out going over through some intermediate tools, right? There's different types of artists that utilize Photoshop in different ways. Me, myself, and I usually focus on the people, more abstract composites. Frostify isn't just that. In my opinion, he's more in the active professional space in terms of designing and has a few more tricks up his sleeve that I'm super excited for you guys to learn about. And we are first going to talk about mockups. As soon as you open up a mockup, there are some good best practices in mind to identify if you indeed have a fantastic mockup you're working with. As we come over here, we have entire folders under effects, the reflection, shadow, the cup top, cup bottom. Things are labeled nicely. As we open these things up, I'll just go through here and just kind of turn things on and off. This is just a very slight color balance from yellow to this really cool blue. The curves, well, that's a huge change right here. Wonderful. The more reflection here, more shadows, which is the entirety of the cup. The logo itself, the color of the mug, the lighting of the mug. And then we, of course, have the shadow, once again, of the bottom mug. In order to, let's say, edit this bottom mug, I'm going to go to bottom mug, and as you can see, this particular layer here is a smart object. We're going to go ahead and click on that smart object, and we're going to scroll up and see that there is a new taskbar that goes over edit contents. Once I do that, it's going to pull up the graphic that is on that mug. Some of these things can be a little finicky, so definitely don't work destructively. We're going to hide this layer, make sure that this background is indeed white, and now we can start making some changes. Let's make a really easy design here. Just real quick, maybe just some shapes of some kind. Let's do this, something like that. Let's just do this again. Cut into here. Just doing this real darn quick for you guys. Let's just do that. Now, if I want this to generate onto the mug, right? I've been working within this smart object, but it's not generating. Why is that? Well, first you have to hit Control S. You want to save this change. Now, you're not saving this to your computer. You're saving it to the smart object that's associated with the main file. So after I've hit save, it is now generated, but that doesn't look quite right? It's kind of floating there. Nothing, I'm at the bottom of the artboard here. What do I do now? How on earth do I get this to go to the bottom? We're gonna simply just select this object here and then drag it down, right? And it'll automatically conform to the shape of the mug itself. And you'll find this with a lot of mockups where there's a designated area for where they want this graphic to be. But if you want to expand upon that, you have the ability to in the main housed file, down to even the curves. If I want the curves to be more intense, right? If I want to try to see what this red looks like in a more intense light, so on and so forth. And now we're starting to develop a really sleek and realistic design as it's conforming to the shape of the object. The next mockup I want to go over is a completely different mockup entirely. There is a lot going on here, right? It's a poster design, really intense folding of some plastic or paper type of material. We have these stickers that are floating around here. We have a lot of them actually. So once again, I'm gonna go through and make, my turn on and off to see what is what. Evidently, this bottom one with the paper is the one that we're wanting to work with. Go into the smart object once again, edit its contents. It's just this. Wonderful. That makes things nice and easy. Let's go ahead and upload something of the sort. Maybe upload something I did in the past. Make that large and in charge. Right? Obviously, you want to choose an image that's going to be the exact dimensions that this is working within. Now, if you're working with an object that maybe, let's say, is only this size, right? And you want that to work. We want to make sure that we are deselecting this background. And if I save this, it's going to make it much smaller, right? The entire conformed area is wanting to be right here, but it's not quite fitting that page. But for resolution's sake, we're just going to be doing that. These stickers are still here. Now, something that you'll pay attention to, and this is something you have to be careful with, is when you make changes to the smart object, sometimes the file itself was built around that text or that original image. If I zoom in here, you can see semblances of the old area because of the way in which the shadows and soft light and other layers have kind of come together. So even coming into here, not that. Let's try to find a way in which there it is. So that's what I mean. You just want to be careful that you are really tailoring this to what you need it to be, because otherwise something like this might slip through and you don't see it, and it's like the original text. So just be careful, right? Some really big red flags to pay attention to is if things are not, for example, labeled. It's not clear where you're supposed to actually edit the contents. There is copyrighted material within the mockup. They'll say that the mockup is free, but for these stickers here might be of copyrighted content. So just want to be careful. I would actually advise getting rid of everything that isn't yours other than the mockup itself, right? As well as if, let's say, some of the layers are merged, like the shadow layer is mixed in with the reflection layer and multiple of this. Like if it looks like this, that looks gross, right? But if there's any combination of those things, try to find a different mockup. Try to find a new one. It's going to save you a lot of grief trying to wrestle with this file. These mockups are supposed to be really easy to use. And if you're finding that it's not easy to use, it might be time to find a different file. You don't want to spend too much time on these, right? This is the cherry on top of that cake, all right? You're bringing this to a client, or maybe you're doing a brand study and you're trying to demonstrate maybe realistic perspectives on the design that you've made so that your client can understand why this is important. Look how cool what I made for you. And this is especially important if you're pitching to them that you're doing everything from scratch, from your brain and your brain alone, and you're not taking any of their ideas. You're just restarting from scratch. Utilize mockups. The next thing that I want to focus on is, of course, more of the compositing area, working with a human. Let's take a look at the handmade lake, the Cup of Joe. I want to adjust these filters by going into the images and I believe curves in here. Yep. We can do this. We can start playing around with some of the features, start adjusting how we want. But what I specifically want to go over is more of a horizontal curve. So basically, looking at this image, we want to adjust the lighting and the shadows and other cool things. So you can do image adjustments, curves, or Control M. And it's going to pull up this graph. Kind of gives us a visual indicator into what's going on here. And as I start clicking and dragging into this, we can start to see that it's affecting the image itself. Moving upwards, the shadows are getting more intense, and then moving downwards, it's getting the lighter highlights are also showing. Now that doesn't look too bad, right? But something that I'm more interested in doing is actually the horizontal curve. Now the horizontal curve is a super awesome feature. It's actually a Photoshop action that I'll be providing later in the resources channel for you to download. But we're gonna go ahead and go to Window, Actions. And up here we can see like a little table was made. Horizontal curve. I'm gonna click into here. It's automatically created multiple masks for me over on the right as I hit play on that. So get your eyes on that. And now this graph is completely horizontal. This is different. This graph looks different. Let's start from the middle and pull downwards. You can start to see that it's affecting a lot more areas than before. The shadows are becoming lighter rather than only the highlights. And then if we come back up, everything is becoming affected. We can start playing around here, maybe adjusting this curve just a little bit more. And there we go. This is a lot more streamlined of a process. And the way that it works particularly is that it's technically putting forward a gray block, right? Everything on this layer here is just gray. Now, the way that it's been actioned or coded is that the gray, anything above this particular hex code is going to do one particular action, and anything below this hex code is going to do a different reaction, darker highlights versus lighter highlights. Now, the reason why this is important is because it allows us to affect more of the image than usual. With the curves, we're affecting things in a more intense manner. This is just another tool that I wanted to share because I think that it helps elevate the compositing methods in order to really bring an image alive. As someone that works with making thumbnails and such, this particular tool is fantastic when really making someone pop. So we have this image of a guy. Maybe he's talking about life and nature in this YouTube video. And I need to have this done in about an hour because that's when the video is uploading. I don't have time to go through with this on Pen Tool and then do the adjustments and then actually add it to the thumbnail layout and so on and so forth. So a tool that I've been using personally a lot is going over to Select and Subject. And what this is gonna do is leave it up to Photoshop to actually cut out a person's body entirely. Now, of course, you want to do this with masks. You don't want it to work destructively, ever. We can already see that it cut them out pretty well, right? And if you do have issues with some of the selection process, you're able to do focus area as well so that you can start really getting nitty-gritty into those areas. Like right here in the hair, obviously, this is why we're gonna do a mask. We don't wanna work destructively, so I'm probably gonna be using like a hair type of brush with a soft opacity so that we can make sure that this isn't like just a hard shape around his head. And then we can completely cut this guy out, right? And we can still work within the curves that we've set for him. See, we can also adjust the saturations, really make him start popping out. Yeah, okay, that looks pretty darn good, if you say so myself. Get that beard, get that fabric, get that cup of joe, get that hair a little bit. Now we're looking with a cutout man with really awesome curves applied, a little bit of sharpening, and now we have a really fantastic image to use for a thumbnail. Now I would also recommend making the eyes wider so that it really pops out, but this isn't a thumbnail tutorial. Those are just a few things that I wanted to go over with you guys today. Frostify, who I'm gonna give the mic over to here, has even more fantastic and awesome tools that he wants to show you. So I'm gonna go ahead and give it up to him.
Let's go ahead and get right into the hair tutorial. So what you're going to want to do in order to cut out your perfect selection and your hair is you're going to find a person, specifically probably you or a client you're working for 9 times out of 10. First off, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to your quick selection tool on the side. And obviously we aren't going to do it this way. Instead, we are going to click this giant select and mask button right here. And if you guys notice, make sure your transparency is at 0. If you go ahead and click select subject, it'll load for a second and your subject will be selected. So from here, you can go ahead and click show edges. There we go. So you can totally see your edges in here as you're working in Photoshop. This is currently kind of the selection, but not necessarily. I guess honestly, for ease of use, we can totally just use like the normal way. The problem is, I mean, like I said, this subject has a lot of different colors to kind of like comprehend. That's why it is a little bit tricky to kind of use the quick selection tool. So I mean, if you use the quick selection tool, that is always an option, and you could always refine your edges. You might think that you like 9 times out of 10 are good to go, even though you have very like rough unhair like structures, you know what I mean? It's very, very important to showcase that. You're gonna go to select and mask, and then one of my favorite tools to use, the refine edge brush tool. It's right here. It's underneath the quick selection tool. This is why this effect kind of goes unnoticed 9 times out of 10, because the tool itself is super hidden. But if you go through this, you can go around your hair, and Photoshop will automatically, by default, obtain the data that was originally in the photo and kind of mix match it together to create a nice hair effect. Make sure you have a nice actual hair effect, right? because it's super duper important. You can obviously change the radius of your mask, but we'll get to that later. For now, you just want to make sure that your selection is being counted for and stuff like that. So size this out and go ahead and do this side here. So as you guys notice now, it's kind of masked out. You can go ahead and feather it just a tad if you really want to, and you can smooth it. You can also add a lot of contrast, which I personally recommend putting your contrast a little bit up, because obviously hair strands and edges of hairs and stuff like that aren't exactly the softest. So maybe around like the 55 range for contrast would probably be okay. That looks pretty good, and we can go back through and honestly refine it even more, believe it or not. So you can go through and do that if you are trying to obtain a nice hair look. But there is a lot of kind of like these shadow things right here, right? Like this top of the head still looks a little bit messy compared to the side of the head. So all you really have to do is just go back over it again, and Photoshop will quite literally mask and kind of come up with what the hair looked like before the actual image was there, which is super duper cool. So there will need to be some touch-ups probably after the fact. It depends on your subject and how much hair the subject has. The more radius you have, I believe the more the hair kind of sticks out. So be careful when using radius and stuff, because it can definitely make your stuff look kind of wonky if it's not used correctly. All of these options are super fantastic. The refine panel in Photoshop will save you so much time when it comes down to cutting out people in Photoshop. There's not really much time to sit here and go, you know, pixel by pixel to refine hair perfectly. So that is definitely something that you can kind of keep an eye out for. Once you're done with your selection, this is a little bit messy because, I mean, for the sake of the tutorial, so we'll let the Photoshop think real quick one last time. And as you guys know, I mean, this side is redefined, this side is semi-redefined. However, the top definitely needs some work. And make sure to click to output to a layer mask or a new layer. It is entirely up to you. Step number 2 is going to be defringing. Essentially, when you cut out a subject in Photoshop, it automatically creates a layer of stroke around your subject because of, you know, selecting certain colors and stuff like that. So as you guys can see, there's like, you know, this black outline right here, which is kind of a little bit odd. The reason why you wanted to redefine your hair first is because the hair is going to give you solid edges, which is going to be perfect for what we're about to do. So when you are going to redefine and get rid of these kind of black strokes around your subject, you are going to hold Control and you are going to click the thumbnail of your mask. Go ahead and press Control click on the mask, and then if you go to select and go down to modify, there are 5 different options here. There's border, smooth, expand, contract, feather. We are going to be focusing on contract today. So essentially these are all options that you can use to control your subject selection or Photoshop selection to very, very specific heights. So we're going to take this contract option and we are going to contract it by maybe like 3 pixels. And as you guys can see, it has gone down and is literally the perfect length away from the kind of, you know, black strokes. Then we are going to go to select, and then there's an option called inverse. Once you click inverse, it is going to essentially flip your mask inside out, which will then make it so you are selecting the outside of your mask and nothing in it. So back to where we were, we inverse and we're right on the border. What we can do now is we can take our brush and paint all over the canvas. We erased it, and now when we press Control D, as you guys can see, we have these beautifully redefined edges across the neck and the ear. And you can repeat this process several times. I normally do, just to make sure that I have it just right. So we're gonna go ahead and do it again, but this time contract it by 2. Go ahead and inverse, and then also paint around it like so. We're just going to go ahead and fill those in. So you can go through, make sure all of your stuff is despeckled and stuff like that. 9 times out of 10, you won't have to go through these steps if you nail your actual refining edges subject down first. It's definitely a matter of playing with settings, and that tool is 100% definitely worth it. As you guys can see, we've got a nice and scruffy we got nice and scruffy edges around the overall hair, and now we can go back into the redefining edges tool, which will help us create a nice mask. So you go ahead and click select subject. As you guys can see, it's definitely not masked out correctly. that's why we kind of go through and we do our thing with selecting the subject and stuff like that. So what we can do now is we can simply just start painting back these edges to a certain extent. But for the most part, this is definitely a cool little trick you guys can do for masking out thumbnail headshots and stuff like that. But now that we have the perfect selection wrapped up, we can go ahead and bring our white brush back and paint in those fine details like so. And as you can see, we have kind of gotten these like, you know, scruffy looking hair strands and stuff like that. Once you are done with your masking and stuff, I am going to show you guys one last and final just kind of tip, and that is the camera raw filter. Make sure to always make your layer a smart object, by the way, because this will allow you to go back and change the camera raw filter, maintaining high quality, maintaining non-destructive layer editing, etc, etc. So where it has exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, as you guys can see, we are looking pretty good. And a lot of you guys also don't know about this as well, but you can actually view what your before and after looks like in Camera Raw. This little icon right here, basically it's, you know, a toggle to default settings, but when you click it, it'll show you your previous version, and when you click it again, it'll show you your edited version. Obviously, we all know that texture and clarity is very important when it comes to making thumbnails, so I normally tend to bump up the texture just a tad, as well as the clarity, just to really get like the skin detail super sharp and very obvious to the face. And another thing I also do is I bring up the vibrance slightly, not a lot. Maybe 15 would be appropriate, because obviously, you know, you want to make sure that your headshot is super vibrant and very eye-catching when it comes to essentially the basics category is all about correcting in terms of lighting, contrast, shadows, and making sure that you have like the correct shading to go into your thumbnail stuff. Detail is definitely hit or miss. I mainly use it for sharpening. Essentially, detail is, I mean, exactly what it says. It's meant to preserve detail or take away detail. So sharpening makes your stuff super HD, and noise reduction makes it super kind of like hazy, because it takes all of the noise and it kind of softens it, so it almost kind of looks like an illustration or like it was ran through AI or something like that. One of the most important tabs to look at, and that is color mixer, especially when it comes to things like thumbnails and others, simply just vibrant, eye-catching graphics. This is super important to keep in mind. So you've got 4 different tabs on the color mixer section. You've got hue, which will change the colors of certain colors depending on what you have in your composition. You've got saturation, which is obviously going to make your colors more saturated. You've got luminance, which is by far the best one you could have if you are doing photo manipulation, which will essentially make your colors brighter and more eye-catching in terms of a light source type of situation. And then you have all, where you can just quite literally scroll through all of them if you really want. But what does the hue tab do, you may ask? We've got reds on this. So, I mean, he's got red lips. So if we scroll the red slider, as you guys can see, it changes his colors, or it changes the color of his lips depending on what we want it to. So if we want it to be pink, we can slide it all the way to the left. And if we want it to be orange, we can slide it all the way to the right. The reason why this is such an overpowered tool is because this can be perfect for fine-tuning those beautiful colors in your piece. If we use it to our advantage, we can absolutely go ahead and go through and really just make this pop. We are going to go on to the color grading tab. Now, this is a really cool tab. Essentially, if you guys have ever used color balance, this is very similarly to how it works. You basically select shadows, highlights, or midtones, and you can select a color. So if our subject was in a super duper like dark and eerie scene, we can move our shadows to kind of like a darker blue tint, especially for like midtones and stuff like that. And as you guys can see, he kind of has like a blue tint to him, and this can be great for manipulation purposes as well. Next is optics. Optics is I mean, pretty self-explanatory. You've got a distort option and you've also got a vignette option, which will automatically create a black background or kind of black focus center circle around your piece. So that is definitely something you can keep a look at the discussion. So we have finished our overall color correction. This was before, this was after. As you guys can clearly tell, he is very vibrant and eye-catching. You can obviously up the exposure and the whites and definitely lower the blacks if you want, and the highlights as well will kind of turn down the lighting. which is also really awesome. So there you go. That's kind of a little how-to on how to make a little thumbnail color correction. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this little lesson, and I hope I was able to give you some tips. Obviously, if you really, really wanted to go back after you redefine your edges and redefine your edges again, really just get into the trenches with this. I know I'm like adding it back, which is kind of bad, but let me take it away. You can get into the trenches with this, make sure it's like all good to go. And yeah, refining edges is very, very important, guys. Always remember that. Make sure to always keep creating, inspiring, and influencing. And I appreciate you guys so much for listening to this lesson.
Thank you all for joining today, and keep on designing. See you guys. And keep on designing. See you guys.